So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Quincy to introduce himself, and then he'll hand it over to you, Roberto.
Super. Thanks, Savannah. Thanks,
Yep.
everyone, for joining. Quincy Berg. I am a enterprise account executive with Panadoc. I have been selling with the business since 2017. Started as an SMB sales rep, working low four-figure to mid five-figure type deals. Now, in my current role, I'm selling anywhere from low five-figure to low to mid six-figure deals. Based out of Cape Cod, I'm calling in, oddly enough, from my parents' house in Wisconsin today. So that's it from my side. Roberto, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Quincy. Roberto Carrero. I'm an enterprise account executive at Sapper Consulting. Been with Sapper for about 4 months. Before Sapper, I was at Outreach for about 4.5 years. So working SMB deals all the way up into the corporate segment. So lots of experience with anywhere between 10K deals to 100K plus deals. So excited to be here.
Perfect. So we'll dig into it. Over the course of today, everyone, you're going to hear just from Roberto's and I experience in how really the buying process has evolved, especially in this economic climate, as well as how the proposal process in management and the proposal side of things really has evolved as the buying process changes. And let me get in here past this screen. And what you can do, the third point, what can you do exactly in your proposals to drive deals forward faster or close deals at a larger clip? So we're going to break it down in a few different key areas here. And like Savannah mentioned, this webinar was sort of born out of some research Panadoc did on its customer base last year. So along the way, I'm just going to sprinkle in some of the data we found in different parts of the proposal process. So in terms of proposal content, a couple different things. So PandaDoc found that proposals with media like photos and videos are 34% more likely to close. 80% of proposals out of that whole group of 570,000 included images, and only 20% included videos, which we'll discuss that a little bit today. And then 65 of proposals that contain electronic signatures close within 24 hours. I do think it's important to add a little bit more context to this data. PandaDoc was mainly catered to SMB businesses. It was founded to target that market back in 2011. So you're looking at average deal sizes that are $2,500 up to $10,000 across the entire business. So as we discuss proposals today, I sell software. Maybe I have a VP of sales at a construction company on the line. The way I structure a proposal is vastly different than someone in another industry and would structure a proposal that way. So keep that in mind. This is data specific to PandaDoc. Roberto, over to you. What does your proposal process look like today? Do you send just a proposal? Do you send other documents during your sales process? What does that look like?
Yeah, first, I think that was a really good call out on the industries. This is definitely going to vary depending on what industry you're in. And I think another call out, anything that we talk about is contingent on you running a really good discovery process. You can't have a good proposal without a good discovery process, right?
Yeah.
My main goal is to make sure that customers feel heard when they see the proposal, right? They shouldn't see something that we haven't talked about, and they should know what to expect ahead of time. So just calling that out ahead of time. One other thing to call out is I'm in the consulting space. It's a little bit different than software sales and my software experience at Outreach. So at Sapper, we build out with an SOW, and that SOW will have a lot of the deliverables for the work that we're going to do. But one thing that we always try to do is build an interactive deck to go along with the proposal, right? So that makes it more engaging than just receiving some document with a bunch of line items on it, right? So that can include pictures, maybe video, whatever that may be, right?
Yeah.
And another really important thing is reviewing it live on the call with the customer so that nothing gets lost in the mix. My main thing is I want them to have a good experience, and that's an easy way to do it.
I love that. And I think that was the biggest takeaway from our first couple of conversations, Roberto, before the webinar is You absolutely have to, as much as you can, get on the phone with prospects and review the proposal with them or any other document, really face to face. I had a deal. This was back in June. This is one of the largest deals Panadoc has ever closed. This prospect vetted 26 different vendors through the buying process. What that means to me is, and what I've seen in my own conversations, is people receive information from vendors and they think like Panadoc sent it. They're misconstruing information between the vendors. So you have to, as much as possible, get on the line, review the proposal, and start uncovering objections that you typically see, is what I also do, during that review. But I think your point that you made before the webinar is really genius as well, where you also send over a video if you can't get all the DMs in like a meeting to review the proposal. What was that about?
Well, like if you're sending out a proposal via email, you've lost all control, right? Like to your example, you're leaving things up to interpretation. And if they're reviewing 26 different proposals, then like it's up to them to figure out what's what, right? If they have objections, you're not there to handle it, right? So if there's a situation where like you absolutely cannot get around that, I will send a video of myself walking through the proposal. So like I use Loom, there's Vidyard, whatever that may be, right?
Yeah.
But if like your champion's taking it up to somebody else, at the very minimum, send a proposal and like take control of your deal.
I love that. And depending on if you use a proposal software or not, there's a lot of softwares out there that allow you to embed videos and make them fully watchable inside of a document. So I do something similar. I'm going to start using your technique, but we're all put together. If I haven't done sort of a technical demonstration to a couple of the stakeholders, I'll do like a quick 2-minute demonstration based on their use case, and then I embed it into the document. And then in terms of other content, like case studies and testimonials to that data I mentioned earlier, we do nice short snippet case studies as videos inside of our PandaDoc documents. And that's something that I'm seeing is still really unique in the market, oddly enough. Embedding YouTube videos into a site, that's been around for a long time. But you still don't see a lot of vendors doing that, especially in some of these industries that I would consider being laggards in technology adoption. Think of like a construction company. Once again, you're starting to see construction companies doing sort of drone walkthroughs of their projects. That could be great fodder to include in a proposal. But I think, one of my biggest points about like content, my personal opinion is make the proposal as short and sweet and concise as possible. Like my proposal is only 5 pages long. Like how long is yours, Roberto?
I think it depends on the size of the deal, right? Like the bigger the deal, the more context you have to add, right? The bigger the deal,
True.
The more confidence you have to give them, right? Like more case studies, maybe a reference, things of that nature. So it really depends. It depends on like the nature of the deal. It depends on what you're selling. But typically, if it's a bigger deal, it'll be a bit longer. Right? It could be 10 slides.
So Megan had a question. Do you hold the proposal until the meeting, or do you send the proposal along with the meeting invite?
I hold the proposal until we review it, and then I will send it over with context. You might need to make changes to that proposal depending on that meeting. So I hold it. Quincy, if you want to.
In my current position, I hold it. In past positions where I'm selling super transactional, I would send out the proposal and the meeting invite. If you're selling, a service that's a few $100s, a few $1,000s, and you have a well-oiled marketing machine you're a part of, you're working 10, 15 meetings a day, and you're trying to progress these people through a sales cycle. So there was months in the past that I closed 20, 30, 40 deals in a month. I didn't have the time to do that. So I would get the proposals out, set up next steps, and then let them take their process from there. But I agree, if you take out time, that's the thing with a lot of LinkedIn content, in my opinion, is people provide advice and recommendations as if they're in a vacuum, where time doesn't matter. You have an infinite amount of time on your hands. Like you have to be respectful of time as you look at different content like this as you take actions in your sales process. So really depends on the deal size. And in my experience, I've done both. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and just to keep adding to that, this is 100% contingent on how many opportunities you manage and how many calls you have in a day. Like if you have 10 or 15 transactional sales in a day, might be worth just sending a couple of videos. Send a video for each proposal that you're sending out. And just that little detail will set you apart from anybody else in your field. If you're working smaller amount of deals, then obviously you can put a lot more time into it, a lot more TLC into those deals and proposals.
Yep. And Roberto, obviously we have a couple other things to cover: brand reputation and pricing. Do you use electronic signatures today? How many, if you do, how many signatures do you typically need to get from a prospect?
Yeah, I mean, electronic signatures, pretty standard. I would say like the average amount of signers, it's probably like two. Some mostly one though, but it's not that many. But that's standard. And I think again, like that goes back to creating like a good customer experience, right? You don't want to make things really complicated. You want to make things like as easy as possible. And I think that should be like standard and the baseline for anybody, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I have later slides on this where, your business has rules. As a sales rep, you certainly need to respect your business rules. The customer, the prospect is telling you these rules as far as their buying process. These rules can be bent and molded with finesse from time to time. My point being is I had a deal, this was probably 3 weeks ago, where the prospect was telling me they absolutely needed 2 signatures on a document. They needed their director of operations and their CFO. As we got into these conversations and we understood the timeline was tight for this project, so something unique with this one, but we got into these meetings to do proposal reviews, and I just asked the prospect, I'm like, hey, can you just sign this instead of having to have both of you sign it? In this prospect, the business case was solid, so they were willing to take ownership, in my opinion. So right there, I was able to take 2 signatures down to 1. That instantly sped up my sales cycle, as opposed to having to chase 2 executives around. That's, you're adding in days into your cycle, in my opinion. So all of these things can be bent and molded to your advantage. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway there is like, if you don't ask, you won't get what you want.
Right.
Go ahead and ask. Like the worst thing they could say is no, but just take the chance. And like, if you built enough rapport, you'll be in a good enough spot for that. Those are 2 good takeaways.
And I love your first point in the webinar. I mean, it's all about discovery. It's understanding their needs. So like a proposal to me, it's just one small tool in the tool belt. I am driving steps forward. I'm getting into conversations like this to then show the proposal as much as I can. You have to drive this stuff forward. You can't rely on a piece of paper to drive the deal forward. Certainly is helpful, but you have to take action. You can't be lazy and just rely on proposals.
That's actually really good, what you just said. Like you can't depend on a piece of paper to drive your deal forward, right? Like a lazy salesperson will just send the proposal and like just hope that it'll move through all of the appropriate cycles that it needs to, right? You need to be the person asking like, what's your legal process? Who needs to see this? Is there security requirements that we need to go through? And you need to push this proposal forward. Like it's not going to do it by itself.
Yep. And I've had, during my time at Panadoc and past businesses, I've had several sales reps ask me like, hey, Quincy, and these were, younger sales reps. Hey, Quincy, do you ever just send a proposal via email and the customer signs it? And I'm like, that's a fool's errand. You can get to that point with really tight discovery, really tight outbound prospecting, but that's a fool's errand. Like go out there, do the work. Don't be lazy. If you do the work, the money will follow. So.
Yeah, that's something that you might see like once in a blue moon on LinkedIn, and like you think that's the norm, but that doesn't happen. So,
yep, absolutely.
Happen often.
The one other point outside of like brand reputation, which is just obviously you're putting together, a nicely designed document. Maybe you're sharing some past awards your business has won, G2 Crowd, for example, if you're in software. So just putting together just something short and sweet that shows the reputation of your company in the space you're in. is obviously key. But I did want to get into sort of the legal aspects of your documents. Obviously, you're sending a statement of work. I'm sending, for context, more of a 5-page proposal quote contract combined document where we're hyperlinking in the terms and conditions. We're hosting the terms and conditions up on the website, which, side note, I'd love for transactional businesses. It helps with redline mitigation quite a bit. But what do you do as far as legal review? Like, when are you getting terms and conditions in front of prospects?
If I get any inclination that they are interested in moving forward, I will ask them, what is the legal process? I think a mistake I made really early in my sales career was I would wait until signature to then ask for the legal requirements and what that is. And that would delay the sales cycle by another 30 days or whatever that might be. Now I just get it to the forefront as quickly as possible. And it serves a lot of benefits, right? Like, if they don't take you through the legal process, like, they're not sold. If they're ready and willing to take you through the legal process early, then you've got a deal. So we typically send an MSA that needs to be redlined, and that could take 2-3 rounds to go through, which could take 3 to 4 weeks. So, for us, we'll establish like a kickoff date and say, okay, well, when do you want to be live? If you sell software, you can say that. And then you work backwards from there, right? So, okay, if you want to be live in 30 days, we should start legal now. Let's get this to you so we can go through the appropriate motions.
Totally agree. As soon as I feel someone I can drive a next step forward with, I'm talking about terms and conditions immediately. And being in software, there's all different sorts of compliance certifications, all different pieces of legislation we need to follow, especially as an electronic signature company. So I'm getting in front of GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, you name it. All of those compliance standards, they all have their specific legalese that you need to contain within your documents. So I'm getting that in front of prospects as soon as I possibly can, because we've all been in cycles where you think your champion at the prospect's company understands their legal process, where they really don't, and then it balloons out to something ridiculous. I've had legal, red lines take 3-4 months to get through, and that was my mistake. I didn't get the legal terms in front of them soon enough. Yeah, there's other parts to that, but some of these, especially nowadays, as you see in this market, the level of risk aversion, like I mentioned, there's 26 different vendors being vetted in a single deal. Legal teams nowadays also have a higher level of risk aversion in this market. So we need to get the terms out in front of lawyers ASAP, get that process started to accelerate your sales cycle towards the very end of the sale.
I would be very inclined to say, like, for me, I try and get that out before I'm on the proposal call. Like, if I know that I'm setting a proposal call, let's say it's in a week or two, maybe at the end of the previous call, I'd say, like, hey, are there any legal requirements that we need to think about before we move forward, even with this proposal? And then that'll set me up to check on that during this proposal call at the end, right? So that's one thing that I'll try to do more often than not.
Yeah, and with that as well, like, depending on my level of trust in my champion, I will cover legal review on every single meeting, asking for updates. Has anything changed with your process? We're seeing that nowadays as well, with buying processes changing due to budget cuts. Processes change oftentimes mid-cycle. You have to be able to change with the process. So you always have to keep that top of mind, stuff like that with prospects.
Yeah, I think, from our perspective, there's more scrutiny on deals of a lower value than there were before, right? Like, more people have to look at a $10,000 or $20,000 deal than had to look at it before. So now more than ever, you got to get ahead of these things for sure.
I had a deal earlier this week. It was a $1,000 project, and their legal compliance team is asking me to sign a 35-page contract for $1,000. No, I cannot expend those legal resources. We'll be upside down on the on the ROI for that project. It's crazy. So, but that's the life we live in nowadays.
Yep, 100%.
And then I'll just answer, Mandy, your question. So how are you saying to include all the details that are on the proposal document? such as the legal terms as a link. Not necessarily you can do that. What I often prefer to do is to include all of the legalese, the terms and conditions, as Word documents, or as sort of a secondary, a Google document, because those are the applications legal teams are used to using when they're doing red lines. My preference is Word 100%. You're starting, in my opinion, to see some legal teams that are younger, coming in and using Google Docs, but I send all that stuff over in Word, Mandy, because if the lawyers want to make red lines, that's the tool they're used to using to make the red lines.
I can chime in. I will preface this by saying, like, I'm not a lawyer. I don't really know a lot of legal terms per se, but I did have experience at Outreach with like running trials and doing proposals and all of that. So what we would do is we would have them sign the regular contract, and in the legal terms, there would be like an opt-in. So you're opting in for this trial. At the end of this trial term, you're just opting into the regular contract. So you're negotiating everything up front, but like they can opt out before a certain period. But again, consult with like your legal teams and all of that. But that's how.
Yeah, we could do a whole separate webinar on contract structures. We'll maybe keep it light for this one, but good point.
Yeah.
All right, so on to the next bit. So analytics. Once a proposal has been sent out, how do you know where it's at? How do you know people are viewing it? There's a lot of softwares out there in the proposal, generation space, like a PandaDoc or like a Proposify or like a Deal Hub, where you can deliver out documents. You can actually see page by page how recipients are viewing the document. So if you send out a document to 3 or 4 different stakeholders, I can see how each of those stakeholders reviews the document. And I use that sent to viewed sort of change in status in my documents as another very important stage in my sales process. If I send out a proposal and the timeline is relatively soon to get the project going, and I see someone doesn't view the proposal, I'm calling them, I'm hyperlinking the proposal again into some sort of communication. I'm getting them to get to that viewed stage. And that, in my opinion, has helped drive a lot of success. It's just starting to add in like mini sales funnels into your overall process. Sent, viewed, certainly completed, a fully signed proposal. So, Robert, what do you use today? I'm using PandaDoc. We have the analytics, but how do you analyze your proposals?
Yeah, I think another good thing to add here would just be like if you're using the sales engagement platform, right? Like I worked at Outreach. If you're using SalesLoft, Groove, any of those, check and see if they're opening your emails or if they're clicking on any of the links that you provided. And you want to build a follow-up process to these proposals, right? Like after that meeting, like let's say you don't have a next step booked, when are you following up? Are you calling them? Are you emailing them to make sure, like, is the deal on track? Do they have any questions? But those are like some indicators that I'll look at. Do they open or click the emails? And then like, what's the next action for me to take? Sometimes it's email, sometimes it's call, but it just depends on the deal and where we're at with it.
Yeah, and for the attendees, no matter what business you're working in today, there's a lot of softwares that have freemium versions where you could sign up. Maybe it's a trial, maybe it's a free subscription to get these simple email tracking analytics. I do recommend looking at either like a proposal generation software or even like a simple e-signature solution where you can put multiple recipients in a document and then send out that document and then get email notifications when people start looking at it. I had a deal, this was a couple years ago, but sent out a proposal to 3 different executives. A couple days goes by, they're all I guess in an internal meeting or something, but I started getting email notifications. This person viewed it, this person viewed it, this person viewed it. They're all viewing it together on separate computers, I guess. But I called up the director of operations. I'm like, you'd have to wordsmith this a little bit, but I'm like, basically, hey, what's going on? Like, do you have any questions on the proposal? And I was able to actually get into the meeting. They were all sitting in a meeting with their own computers. So I zoomed into the meeting and then we just did a quick little proposal review right there. So, don't be afraid to take a little bit of risk, call someone, asked to get into a meeting, all they can say is no. Or, say you're being too forward with your questions. And, that can be dealt with. It's worth it at the end of the day to take action really on these documents.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about before, right? Like the proposal is not going to sell your product or service. Like you've got to drive this forward. And if that means you've got to call them directly or you got to send that email, you have to do it.
Yep, 100%. And then one of the data coming out of the Panadoc study, which I found was interesting, is you're 30% more likely to close a deal if you send a series of reminders after you send it out. So there's a couple different camps with that. Like obviously that's just on the vein of thought we were just on. Do your follow-up, be a salesperson, drive these deals forward. I see a lot of junior sales reps still use automated email reminders for their proposals, which I am way against. Really against. You're leaving your sales process up to a generic email. Like how does that make any sense? Really, no matter what deal value you're working. What do you think, Roberto?
I think the standard should clearly just be personalized follow-up. Me specifically, I live and die by what I call a manual reply follow-up. So if I reply to a customer, I'll attach a manual follow-up sequence, and it's just a personalized email every 3 or 4 days. And I'll customize that based on our conversation, what their goals are, information from the proposal, and just make sure like I'm super tight on that. But yeah, I would never automate that.
Yeah, I like your process. I'm a little more old school or maybe caveman, you could say, where depending on the timeline of the project, I will make follow-up notes in my calendar. And then I'm lucky with like the PandaDoc system, you get a dashboard to see all the documents. So that makes it a little easier, but I will just drive the follow-up off of notes on my calendar. And then I'll use all the channels at my disposal, right? Like don't forget about texting. You should always, if possible, text prospects in follow-ups in my experience. LinkedIn, calls, voicemails, email. Like use all of the channels at your disposal.
That's that's one thing that I did miss is texting. I think that if you are at this stage, you should be texting. And that's when your deal is solid. Like if you're in a texting relationship with your champion or your buyer, I think you got a good shot. So that's a good point, Quincy.
And I think people are way less uptight about texting nowadays. And this is, once again, my experience. Am I going to try and text like a chief information security officer something? No, absolutely not. But in my experience, people are way more amenable to texting because it's a channel that's just not really being fully utilized today by salespeople. But you have to read your champion. That's the part of the finesse of being a salesperson. So you have to read who you're working with. You have to feel their body language. Like, did they give you permission to text them? Like, are they open to texting? Or, if you're open to taking action and a little risk, do you just text them straight up? It's a feel thing.
I think for me, just ask them. Just ask them.
Yeah.
Like, hey, is like your preference texting? Should I send you an email? Should I call you? Like, how can we drive this forward? And you'd be surprised. There's a lot of prospects who say, yeah, shoot me a text. Like, this is important. Yeah. Let's do this. Right?
Absolutely.
So just ask them.
Absolutely. And then we'll move into proposal management next. Sorry, Juan, just looking at your message. If it's cool with you, Roberto, I'll just address it now. Juan mentioned I have sent a proposal before starting a trial. Now I don't know how to review the proposal in the middle of the trial period. This looks like a PandaDoc specific question. Molly, looks like you're covering that. Thank you. All right, in terms of proposal management, just a couple data points here, and then we'll get moving to Q&A. So based on PandaDoc's analysis last year, on average, 20 documents are created from a single template, which is kind of an odd stat to me, to be honest, because I'm using templates pretty much in every aspect of my document process. Like, what does your templates look like, Roberto, on your team?
Yeah, so we use PandaDoc as well. Our SOW terms are pretty lengthy, so there'll be standard templates depending on like what project that we're working on. So really easy, saves a bunch of time. You should templatize most of it and then just customize based on what works for you. I think starting from scratch would be pretty lengthy.
And I think there's the concept of document templates, and then there's the concept of templates of like bits and pieces of content that can be reused over and over. Maybe like for a contract, like a specific addendum, maybe for like a specific type of prospect in a certain industry, you have a case study that matches that industry. Proposal softwares can do this, but I don't think a lot of people know that Microsoft Word can also do that sort of quick adding of content as well. So if you haven't looked up the quick parts functionality in Word, if that's where you're building your proposals today, you can start to build a database of bits and pieces of content where you just drop in that content. If it's a new proposal, you want to use some old proposal content, you can just search for it and drop it in, and then probably work through the reformatting, but you're at least getting a step closer to speeding up the process. So have you ever seen that at all, Roberto? It's like, these tools that we've been using since grade school have just a bazillion different features in them. I don't think a lot of people know about it.
Not specifically in Microsoft Word, but I believe it. And I think that one thing I do want to add on templates is that you should make them depending on like the size of the deal, right? Like you can have templates for your smaller range deals, maybe your mid range deals, and then your larger deals, because you don't want to have too much information on the smaller deals. You don't want to have too little for the bigger deals. So when you're creating those templates, just like keep that in mind.
Yeah, I would say for my small deals, low 4, low 5-figure deals, I'm using about a 5-page proposal. That balloons out pretty quickly. Depending on the size of the company you're working with, we're talking like a 20 to 50-page document roughly with all the legalese contained within it. There's ways to templatize that up. You can set up your content. Obviously, have your legal team vet it first, but you can set up your content and then templatize it for different sales scenarios like Roberto mentioned. So once again, I think to that last point, we brought this up a couple times, like ask, like be vocal, ask for what you need, no matter if you're trying to get something done internally or externally.
Yeah.
Just ask.
100%. Yeah. I think that the worst thing for a sales rep is to get to this stage and then the process is broken. And then it's complicated and difficult to manage the process internally before even getting it out. So if something is broken, this is specifically for a rep perspective, if something's not working, if something's broken, ask for what you need, get the information, so it'll smooth the process over time.
Yep, love it. Cool. Well, then I think we'll move on to Q&A. I know we've been answering a few questions already. A couple different things here. Let me come back up. So, Adarunke, hi leaders, I'm enjoying this conversation. Okay. Thanks for the feedback. I appreciate that. So Roberto does as well. Alex says, can you send us your email chain and proposal templates? I'm, probably cool with it. Let me just check with the team first, but I don't see any issues about that. Alex, if you don't mind, here are emails. Do you mind just taking these down and doing a quick follow-up after? We can see if we can get you what you need.
I can whip some stuff together as well. I think it's easier if anybody wants to reach me on LinkedIn, just shoot me a request, Roberto Carrero. I can send you something there.
Solid, yeah. You can do the same thing for me, Quincy Berg. Joseph has a Panadoc specific question. Is there document management advantages to uploading our existing contracts into Panadoc? I like Molly's point about the templates, certainly, Joseph. It really depends on like historical saved documents, what you're looking to do, over the next 5 to 10 years, really. I'm sure in your experience, you buy software, you use that software for a certain amount of time, and then you may move on from working with that business. So if I'm in like a sales cycle with you, Joseph, typically what I recommend is if you have a base of historical contracts, you might want to look at saving them directly in your CRM, or you can just build out like another cloud-based repository, like a Box or a Google Drive. Store all the documents in there. As you use different vendors like a PandaDoc, you can utilize APIs and other ways of automation to send copies of documents into that cloud repository. But that cloud repository, in my opinion, you're going to be with a service like that likely for longer than you will with like a vendor out there in the document generation space. So just my 2 cents. Scrolling through here, they just keep coming in. Chris G mentioned you use competitors' battle cards to drive decisions forward. What do you think, Roberto? I'll let you take that one.
Do we use competitors' battle cards to drive decisions forward? I want to get away from battle cards as much as possible, because if you get into a battle card conversation, it just means they're not confident in you and they're just comparing feature to feature. And if you get into that like feature battle, sometimes you'll lose. So I would steer more away from that and try and drive the conversation more towards like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And like, are we the right partner to help you get there? But I would try and steer away from battle cards specifically, in my opinion.
I agree, because your competitors, their solutions are constantly growing. They have a roadmap that their product team is hitting to some degree. So the information, as soon as you get it from your marketing team, pretty much decays instantly. What I prefer to do is, as I work through a process, obviously I try and give my 100%. On a discovery call, I really try and map out the needs and position myself as an expert to the prospect. And then I start asking for my competitors' contracts. They're existing, like if they have an incumbent in place, another vendor that I compete with, I'll ask for their contracts. And if I've done a good enough job during the start of the process, I'll get these contracts. And then I can model my price. I can build just a way cleaner business case that way if I understand already what they're paying for a similar service. So less battle cards, less me explaining what the competitors, like how we compare to the competitors. It's getting the competitors, information and then using that to my advantage.
I have also done that many times. You'd be surprised how many people will give you their current contract. And I think you can get to that point if you've built enough rapport with them and enough trust. You can, my situation, I say, what is it going to take to get this deal done? And most of the times they'll send us what they have. Like, let's see if we can make this happen. Less features, like more value.
Yep, absolutely. Jamie Walden had a question. Roberto, you mentioned that you have a deck and a proposal for the proposal review meeting. Is the deck just the pitch deck version of the proposal? Or do you cover different items in the deck versus the proposal document? And then after the meeting, do you email them both?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So I'm in more of a consulting sale. So we'll have an SOW that has like deliverables for our project. And that'll be like more so like on a Word doc, like through PandaDoc, whatever that may be, right? So it's really just like blocks of text. And like, it's not really engaging, right? So what I'll do is I'll create a slide deck and I will tell a story. I will say, these are the components of the project and these are the milestones that we are going to go on together to get there. And it's just more engaging. We include like photos, graphics. And we talk about the highlights of what's in the SOW in the pitch deck, but it's just more digestible and consumable. And then, yes, we'll send over both the deck and just the SOW with the terms on it.
And then Jonathan Elder had the question, touches in your typical sales process, how many voice, email, social, LinkedIn? The way the question is framed, I'm assuming he's talking about outbound prospecting. If we're talking in a cycle, it's very hard to average it out. I had that deal, one of the larger deals at PandaDoc. was, I believe, it was right around like 25 to 30 total meetings. And if you think about that many meetings, you're easily over 100 emails in a chain. So that was like a 9-month sales cycle, roughly, versus I had a customer earlier this week that we did one meeting, another half an hour meeting. I sent them one email, I sent them a proposal, and then they signed. So it's too hard to average it out. I don't know if you have anything on that, Roberto.
The way I read that question is like, what's like your typical touches in like your outbound sales process? That's like,
Yeah,
that's kind of how I read that question. And I would say it depends based on like your industry and what segment that you're in. I would say like on average, it could be anywhere between 10 to 15 touches. On the front end, obviously, it'd be like email, call, social, like within the first couple of days, all three of them. And then just staggering out the rest of the touches by 3 or 4 days. So 10 to 15 would be my answer for that.
yeah, that sounds pretty standard as far as like best practices, I think, across different industries. You would know better than anyone, really, Roberto, with working at Outreach with the data you all had at your fingertips. So I like that. And then Erica Santana wrote, I like the idea of building the steps of the sales cycle working backwards from the implementation date, but nearly every time I ask a prospect, they say ASAP. That's a good one. How can I pull a lever to get a better date from the prospects? Any thoughts? I'd like your perspective first, Roberto, then I'll go with mine. It's different, I think, with subscription software. That's cool.
I create a little bit of scarcity. Like, I don't know when we can kick off. So like my team has availability on X date. Do you think we can get this done by X date? If not, it might be longer. Because that's actually true in consulting, right? Like we have delivery partners and they only have so much bandwidth. In a software sale, you've got an implementation team as well, and they only have enough bandwidth too. So if you're trying to lock down a date, you might want to think about introducing that component in there of like, we want to get you in for kickoff on X date because our team has availability. And that's worked for me.
Yeah, I like the implementation sort of scarcity timeline for the economic climate we find ourselves in today. Most of my best business cases right now are around combining cost savings with efficiency gains in the software. What that typically means for me, Erica, is I'm taking out an incumbent vendor. So they already are using one of my competitors. I'm ripping them out. I'm putting in PandaDoc. So with that sort of subscription type of sell, you just need to figure out when is your renewal date with the vendor. When do you think the vendor gets the renewal paperwork to that person you're trying to sell to? That's a little bit extra that I've started to add in over time. But you need to figure out, okay, if I need to rip out an incumbent, how much time do I need? If I know their account management team is trying to put an auto renewal, clause in front of them to get them to sign sooner, I need to get ahead of that entire process. So I know with me, I typically need about 3 months to really have a nice implementation. So then I use my experience, or at least I try and use my experience at Panadoc, where I say, hey, I literally have done thousands of these projects. Like, this is what you need to do in my experience. And like, here's all the different traps you need to watch out for as you take out this vendor. And I try and position myself as an expert to get more tight timelines. So it may just be, I don't know what you think, Roberto, just maybe doing tighter discovery, asking deeper questions to help Erica be perceived as an expert more so, will allow her to ask tighter questions around the timeline.
Yeah, I think it comes into the discovery. I think like what we're looking for here is like a critical event that you need to find. Is there a date that they need this by, or can you create some sort of critical event through scarcity or whatever that may be? But you need to find something to latch onto to create that in the deal.
Yep, agreed. Vitaly had another Panadoc question. Does it make sense to send proposals with limited time discounts for deals where security legal processes can take up to a few months? Like, does it help, speed up the sales cycle? Are there any best practices in this regard? I stay away from artificial discounts because of your exact point, Vitaly. Good luck trying to sell a legal team to move faster because their business is getting a discount for your service, where there's been a pollution of that, by sales reps for however long. The classic car salesman line, like, hey, if you buy this before the end of the month, you get a great deal. Like, all those timelines are superficial. They're not real. So I don't do discounts really unless so let me backtrack. I still do them from time to time, but if I do discounts, I'm very upfront about why I'm asking for a discount. And it's not saying like, hey, I need you to sign by this date to do this discount. Maybe there's some other trade-off. Like, hey, if you're open to serving as a reference call for me in the future, I'll give you this discount. And I really like that move because then you're closing a deal that opens up other deals. And if you do that enough and you do that in the same segment, you could really expand your revenue nicely for like your own personal book of business. So don't trade on timeline. That's not going to work at a high enough clip that you want it to. Trade off of other stuff when you give discounts, in my opinion.
My take on that is that you want to maintain as much credibility as possible in your cycle. And if you tell them a deal is contingent on signing this month and it pushes to next month and it's the same price, you don't look as credible as you did before. So agree, like reference calls are good, but only offer this discount if like you can hold onto it long term.
Yep. Brandy asked, question, we sell a big hardware/software enabled product that requires configuration, big ticket item, and we aren't charging for the configuration work, but ultimately makes up the proposal. By the time the proposal is submitted, we have collaborated with the buyer and confirmed everything, but it is a lot of work to get there. Any suggestions on how to speed it up? Or do you think we should charge a nominal fee for the configuration? That's a tough one, just with how specific it is.
Here's my take on. Like we mentioned at the top of the call, a lot of this stuff is industry specific. And by nature, there are industries that move very slowly. And this seems to be one of them. So I think it's just understanding that this is like a bigger ticket item in a specific industry that takes longer. So I think like get ahead of things as much as possible in terms of like these legal T's and C's, and like make sure you're certifying things ahead of time, but just understand that like that's the longer sales cycle by nature.
Yeah, I mean, that's my best crack at it, Brandy, as well as try and get in front of the very typical end of sales processes that you're seeing, try and get in front of them as soon as possible. And that's an interesting point about the fee for the configuration. I wonder like why your executive team isn't charging a fee today. Is that just how like, the trend is in the market as far as like configuration fees? My take on configuration fees is you're adding value. Why not charge for it? We used to not charge for it at PandaDoc back in like 2017, 2018. We started building in professional services, and it's really helped solidify, in my opinion, like a reputation in the space. People need help implementing software. It's totally valuable. You should sell. You should charge for configurations, but I don't know like the exact team's take on that, so not sure.
And all the questions?
All right. I think that's it, Savannah. If you want to jump back on and wrap up.
Looks like there's one more from Jamie in the Q&A.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Do you have one or two favorite go-to next step strategies you like at the end of a proposal review meeting?
Really good question. One of my favorite things is to go through implementation and cover exactly all of the steps that someone would need to go through to do a Panadoc implementation. And I like doing that because then it's a really nice handover to my post-sale team. But I can also ask questions about where they're at in the buying process. So I just used that one a couple of weeks ago, gleaned some more information, and now I have hopefully a signed contract by Thursday. So I like that move quite a bit.
For me, this goes back to what we've been talking about of the legal review process, whatever that may be, bringing it up before the proposal call, because that way you check in on what are the steps to signature on the proposal call. And then what I'll do is I'll schedule another call. It could be in a week or two to check on the progress of moving this through their legal process. So I always want to have something on the books just to make sure that like we're constantly checking on it. We've talked about like calling and sending emails and texting and following up on proposals, but the best thing is just to have a set review process on the books, just to like keep that communication open.
Good question there, Jamie.
Yeah, that was a great question. All right. I think that's it, everybody. Quincy, Roberto, thank you so much for speaking and sharing your insight today. It was a joy to work with both of you, and thank you all for showing up and asking your questions. And we look forward to our event on Thursday. We've got Larry Long Jr. and Richard Harris. They're going to be chatting about how to change your mindset and boost your sales for toward the end of the year as we get into the next quarter. So make sure you show up on Thursday, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everybody.